Does it roll into the? Apparently not. So
no, we're live, buddy.
We are live.
Do it
We
live.
get the warm up with the music. Team Tim here. Thanks for joining, guys. Another show this week. Tim Golden is out at CompTIA ChannelCon, making his way back to New England area. So he is out for the day. You know those flights when you go from the West Coast to the East Coast, you just kind of lose the day. So myself, Tim Schnur, Jesse Miller, Dr. Miller with us, and special guest today, Nick Oles, coming on the show to talk about his book. So quickly, we'll go around the horn, just talk about a little about who we are, where we came from, why we're in the industry, why we're doing this. And Jesse, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, Jesse Miller with Power PSA Consulting. I help MSPs build and scale security programs for profit, right, rather than for middling. I worked as a CISO for an MSP for years and years, built a successful security program there, and scratching my builder's itch now by helping other MSPs build and be successful with security services. That's who I am.
Awesome. Nick, great to have you on the show. So really curious to hear about where you came from, how you got here, what you're trying to do now. So
yeah, thanks. I appreciate it, and it's awesome to be with you guys. There's some really great mustaches going live right now, so pretty pumped about that. So
my mustache, bro.
Yeah, we got to get Tim on the bandwagon, man. I mean, it's like
I feel naked. I think it would come out white. So
someone is not like the rest here. Yeah, you got to get on board, man. So So
my father had a mustache his entire life. When he grew it, it just had it until 70. So
yeah, I never had one. I was talking to Jesse about this when I first crossed paths with him, and I was like, my whole life I never had facial hair, never had a mustache, and then just kind of like went with it one day. And Jesse sounded like you had a similar experience, and yeah, and my wife was just like, hey, you can roll with it, and I'm like, that's all I needed.
That mustache riz is strong, my friend.
It's so funny too, because when you like see another guy with a mustache, it's kind of like the Jeep thing. Like, you're like, hey man, like I get it, you get it, like you know what it's like. Like you have this like unwritten thing going back and forth, and I never had that without having a mustache. So it's I think I'll keep it around for a little bit.
Funny.
But yeah, so I mean, you asked my background, Tim. So I've been in the industry about 15 years. I've had a pretty unique background where I've been able to work for different military organizations, different public and private companies. I've done some teaching, at the like undergraduate, graduate, certification level, kind of all over the board, and that's kind of like given me a really good background, covering a lot of different fields and seeing a lot of different things from different industries, and going through all kinds of training and experiences and stuff like that I wouldn't get had I just focused in one of those areas. So I've been extremely fortunate with that, but I had kind of a traditional upbringing kind of in this industry. I did not have an IT background when I started. I thought I wanted to be an accountant, went down the accounting road, and quickly determined that was not for me at all. So I kind of did what everyone else did and just kind of pivoted as quickly as I could, and hoped that no one would realize I didn't know what I was doing or where I was going, or I had no background in this. And it's worked out so far, and I will probably continue doing that. But, my first actual IT job was a help desk job, and it was at a university. It was awesome. It was kind of like the Wild West. There was not enough people, pretty fast and loose with security policies. And there was a lot of really smart, students that were always getting viruses and always, testing all these different controls and policies. And, like you always have that one kid that's like, I got you. You didn't lock this down. And they show you, and you're just like, come on, man. So it was a really awesome opportunity for me. And I saw all kinds of crazy stuff. And it kind of like sparked my interest in security. And I still remember the first day, students would come to us and their computer would be like blue screen, like dead. And they'd be like, my term paper's on here, like, help me. And we'd be like, well, it's a little bit late for that. You're kind of in trouble. But this one time, we would help them as we could. This was like in the malware bytes days, and like pop-up blockers and adwares were really big and stuff like that. So we'd have a list of controls and things that we would run through and try and run them on the machine and bring it back to life. And then ultimately, when that failed, it would just be, like system restore, load whatever you can back on it. But we had a user come in one day and they were like, yeah, I got this alert on my computer. It's supposedly from the FBI. Like, I need you guys to look at it. And we were like, oh man, this is like legit. Like, they're about to come in here, like running and gunning, like kicking in this dorm room and, pushing aside the beanbag chair, whatever. And we looked at it and it was like, I guess it was like an earlier version of like ransomware kind of adware kind of thing, but like the screen was blocked. It was an ad over the entire screen. You couldn't click on anything. You couldn't move it. You couldn't minimize it. You couldn't open like Task Manager or anything like that. And it was like, oh, your files have been seized by the FBI. You need to go get a MoneyGram or Western Union like receipt or money through those platforms and send it to us, and we'll unlock your files.
What year was this, Nick? Any idea? Just
this would have been in like 2007, 2008.
Okay.
Yeah. So like early 2000s, still in the 20th century, but
not paying in Bitcoin. Yeah.
Yeah, no. So Bitcoin was probably worth like a couple cents then, like it wasn't.
I think that was like, I think they were writing it, they or he or whoever,
Yeah. That's a whole nother episode.
Gosh,
ordeal. So it kind of started with that, and I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And I'm like, there's no way the FBI would take MoneyGram or Western Union. So I was like, this is crazy. Like, these people are getting, they're getting paid through this platform that's legitimate to unlock these files. And that's just what kind of like hooked me. And then I was all in on security. I thought it was super cool. Like most of my time has been in defense. I've done some offensive pen testing and stuff like that, but I just kind of really like sunk my teeth and then, got an advanced degree in cybersecurity and just started really like diving into defensive stuff. So one of my first jobs after that, I did some network engineering, some network admin stuff, and then managed some AV products, and then kind of got my first actual cybersecurity role, which was in incident response. And when I was at a very large organization, manufacturing, publicly traded company, and I was kind of one of the first people hired on for incident response, and it was kind of like one of those like build the ship while you're in the water type deals. So doing a lot of things.
Military like experience. Did you graduate kind of like, I don't know, roughly the same age as Jesse and I, we won't age ourselves, but so you were doing kind of like IT things, and you mentioned accounting, IT. I'm just trying to kind of like put it all together.
Yeah, no, that's great, because I was kind of like waving over that. So I graduated college kind of in like the 08, 09 timeframe, and if you guys are old enough to remember that, really, really good time to try and find a job, buy a house. Like
I was in finance until 2008, 2009, and I'm a new person. Change my name, move away, get a new ID, right? Like, finance is done.
It was crazy, man. Like people are graduating and it's just like they're like moving back in with their parents and working like manual labor jobs because there was just no jobs like at all. So I was like in that. It sounds like you guys experienced some similar. Jesse, I think you told me you had a similar like almost career pivot change during that time frame, right?
Well, that's actually how I ended up in managed services, because I was working in carrier operations, and we were building the .com bubble is what did that to me. So it was the recession before 2008 that did it, and then forced me out of, because we had built the information superhighway, all the fiber switching up so big that there was no work to be had for years once that .com bubble burst. So that's when I went back to school and started in managed services. I had a similar experience, but it was the recession prior. And then
I remember that. The dark fiber. Remember that, Jesse?
Yeah. So that's what we were installing, right? And but interestingly enough, 2008 is really what made me see MSPs and fractional services as a counter-cyclical niche that is actually primed for those times of trouble, because when organizations are slashing budgets and stopping hiring, they still need things done. So MSPs who are providing fractional and budget reducing services are actually counter-cyclical to those types of things. And so that's really where the kind of light bulb came on, is in 2008. So I won't divert the conversation too much, but I'll let you continue there.
Yeah. So
Yes. Keep going, Nick.
Similar. Yeah. Go ahead, Tim.
No, keep going. I as I said, I'm enthralled in kind of like, how you jumped around, as I think we all have. So.
Yeah. So, I quickly realized I didn't like accounting. There was no jobs in it. So I figured I would continue staying in school. So I went to school for a master's degree, but I also, in that time, I joined the military as well. Cause I'm like, man, this is a pretty stable bet. I could get a job for a couple of years, and kind of pivot from there. And I knew I wanted to get in IT, and I knew if I picked a job in the military that was IT related, like it would solidify me working in IT. It's like no one could debate, the industry you worked in, the company, whatever, that you could have all these certs in education and never land a job. So that's kind of what I went with initially. I was a regular communications officer. I'd finished college, so I became an officer. And that was fun. It was a pretty broad spectrum of things, radios, satellites, computers, telephones. Like you kind of didn't master any of those, but you learned a little bit about a lot of different things. So I really enjoyed that. And I started, did that for a little bit. And then I was in the National Guard I'm still in, but for a while. And that kind of allowed me to, leverage both experiences as I started getting civilian jobs working in IT, also doing IT work in the military. I could kind of, pull from each experience. And, people at my civilian job would ask me how the military would do it. I would kind of laugh and say, that's probably not a great point of reference, but we'll talk about how we do it at the civilian side and back and forth and stuff. But I did that, and I kind of got my first cybersecurity job, which was what I was discussing at a large organization. And right around that time, the Army specifically started up this new cyber branch, so the cyber career field. And that was around 2015, 2016. So I spent the first couple of years, first 5-ish years just being an IT guy, both in the military and then doing a little bit of cyber on the civilian side. And then it was around like 15, 16 when the Army started doing cyber. It took a little bit of time to get it hammered out. And then I applied to be a cyber officer. There was a bunch of training that I had to do. So I went down to Georgia. It's really hot, humid, a lot, sandy, a lot of really cool bugs. But outside of that, really cool training. They did a pretty good job incorporating, like some SANS courses and, practical stuff, exercises, hands-on things. So I really enjoyed that, became a cyber officer, and then things kind of just like took off from there. So I kind of leveraged that to get other civilian jobs and stuff like that, and still stay in the military. But yeah, I've been very fortunate for that.
Did you at MSQB Geek? Did you happen to hear the story of John Hammond from Huntress?
Yes. So that story was.
You reminded me. It's like you're like cybersecurity wasn't a big deal in the military until like 2016. I think the timeline kind of mirrors his experience. And Jesse, it's bottom line. He basically went to the Coast Guard. He wants to be in cybersecurity, and they're just like, yeah, we're just not doing that. And then he ended up like almost like, I don't want to call it flunking out of the Coast Guard, but like. He left the Coast Guard and had like a liability, right? Like he had to pay his way back or something like that because he never served and whatnot. But yeah,
he was going to the Coast Guard Academy, and like any of the service academies, you don't pay for the schooling, and then you owe them so many years. And when he wasn't like going to give them those years, they were like, well, you owe us all this money, and they like calculate out. It was something crazy, like $250,000.
Wow.
They were like,
you heard it, yeah. It was just a crazy story.
Yeah,
and sure enough,
and it was a really good talk. Like walking through that. But you're right. The military wasn't that all in on it. They took some time to catch up, just like everyone else in the industry.
So I'm super interested to hear, the book. What's the title of the book? Just before we keep going here.
Yeah, so the book is, hopefully you guys can see that, it's called How to Catch a Fish.
How to Catch a Fish.
A practical guide to detecting phishing emails.
So we have some, I think you have some copies to give away. So
I do. Yep.
We're gonna take the best questions that people ask, and whoever asks the best, how many copies do you have that we can give away here?
We could we could probably do 3 or 4 copies.
Okay, so
if there's some really good questions, we'll expand that out. But
okay, all right. So minimum 3 or 4. We'll do more if people are asking. So yeah, ask your questions about phishing emails, and I actually have one. We'll get into that later. Email that just came hot across my desk here, but what as someone who's, and I'm sure there's plenty of us out there who have toyed with the idea of writing a book, or but really don't know how that all materializes. What's your path? What inspired you to write the book? Why did you write this book? Walk us through how that came to fruition, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So when I had my first cybersecurity job working in incident response, one of my tasks was to manage a reporting mailbox. So a lot of organizations, they'll set up,
sounds fun.
Yeah, it was great. But they'll set up an email like phishing at whatever company, suspicious security, whatever. And I remember coming in and there was just like hundreds of emails in this mailbox that no one had even looked at. And I'm like, oh boy, like this is about to be interesting, and some were false positives where they were, marketing emails, scams. Some were like very sophisticated, like, hey, send me this money, or I already sent this guy money. What do I do? And stuff. So as I'm going through this, we didn't really have a defined process of how to scan them or how to evaluate an email. And it was kind of one of those things where like, hey, spend some time and figure it out. So I started by going through all these different blog posts, and, YouTube it was around, but again, this was like in the 14, 15 timeframe. So it wasn't as much of like a training platform as it is now. Right. So I'm kind of scouring through these different tools, trying to figure out my own process and, learning how to evaluate headers and all that stuff. And I'm kind of like, man, there should be a book or something. Like everyone writes books on all kinds of stuff. Like no one has anything about this.
Right.
But again, this was in like 14, 15. This is almost 10 years ago. So I kind of just like wrote it off. I'm like, whatever. And as I've progressed, I've used that skill set in all kinds of jobs. And I just got to a point where I was like, there's never going to be a good time to write a book. It's like anything else. And I'm like, if I just get started, I'll make progress and I'll get it done, or I'll fail miserably, one of the two, but at least I tried. So the start from scratch to publishing, the first thing, it's just like writing like a book report. You start out with an outline. So you've got to come up with a brief summary of what you want to cover. That's like your elevator pitch to the publishers. And then an outline of each chapter, what they're going to entail, what you're hoping the readers are going to learn. And then they kind of like, the publishers take a review of it and they shoot you some feedback. They give you a thumbs up, thumbs down, and you kind of go from there. But then that's like really just when the work starts. So they review it, they give you feedback. If they want to progress with you, then they give you a contract. You sign the contract, and there's deadlines built into it. But then you have to select a technical editor. So the technical editor, like they don't get paid anything. They're volunteering their time. It's a very time-intensive job where not only are they reading all of your content, but then they're checking the technical facts. So, like in my book, a lot, like one of the best tools that I've leveraged over the years is VirusTotal.
There you go. So, there's Raymond's question.
So, I'll have to check that one out. So, like, if for example I'm referencing putting a link or an attachment in VirusTotal, then my technical editor's got to go to the site, duplicate what I'm doing, making sure what I'm saying makes sense, making sure my screenshots are accurate and stuff, and then giving his feedback. So him and I are kind of like, I'm working first. He's coming up as kind of like a cleanup to, proof all my work,
Gosh, which is hard because you're training them like cybersecurity, right? You're training them a lot.
Who would sign up for that?
I don't know.
Yeah. I said that. I'm like, I don't think myself or my technical editor, like either of us knew what we were getting into. And I was very fortunate enough. So I had a college professor that taught English, one of the best writers I knew. And prior to being a professor, he was a geek back in the Al Gore days, like way back in the like 90s. So he started out as a programmer and then pivoted into higher education. So he had those like technical fundamentals, which was awesome. But he also had far better writing skills than I could. So it was kind of like a grand slam for me. And his name was Ron Scott, great guy. He's in the book, huge amount of help. But so as we're progressing,
Yeah, you mentioned Virus Total. Is that the same thing that Google bought, like the threat intel? Like I remember we used to spend like 7 figures or more on feeds from Virus Total.
Yeah. So
at the company I was at. So I mean, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Virus Total, like I think there's like between 80 and 100 different security vendors that provide them different security signatures, but they also will evaluate links as well. So you can submit links or attachments to Virus Total. They will scan through all of the data that these vendors provide to them, and then it'll tell you if any of these vendors have hits for these files or links. Essentially, like having 80 to 100 antivirus programs scan this file. And it's free, open source. We cover it in the book of how to get to it. It's an awesome platform. So
is that like you're paying for the API then, right? Because you're running just like thousands and thousands of these things, and an MSP might just use it. There's probably just a simple search that's free. You're saying, is that right?
Yeah, and there's a community edition as well, and that lets you like comment and collaborate on what others comment about. Like a sample. So say I have like an invoice attachment that I want to run through it. For the free version, I can submit it and see what it says, see what security vendors have classified this as malicious or not. If I have a paid community edition, then I could hook into the APIs, or I can look at what like Mustache Jesse man over here like comments on it. He says, hey, this is ransomware. Hey, this is a false positive. Or hey, we sent money to these guys. Like, check your accounts payable department or something like that.
Right.
So and it's fairly cheap, I think, for the community editions. You'd have to look into the pricing, but the last time I checked, it wasn't too bad. But I think it's like a user base. However many licenses you need.
Okay.
So I'll finish up a little bit more on the book, and then we can answer this question going a little bit more. So after we got through all of the proofs, then it had to go to the publisher. So this book was published through A-Press, which is a Springer organization. A-Press is like their subdivision of just technical books. They've got a lot of other great content out there, but they have their own team they're more, like grammar editors. So they would go through it, scrub it, make sure all the references made sense, make sure we were giving credit where credit was due. So if we're, using an image from a website, we have to make sure that we give credit to that website. So, kind of like a citation for like a research paper or something like that. So they would go through and make sure all that stuff works. And then, that would give us another round of feedback or edits that we'd have to make. And then, it went to the art. So the publisher actually designed, the cover that we have here. They gave us a couple different versions. We got to pick that. And then it's just some little stuff like acknowledgements, bio, some minor things like that. And then that's kind of it. So all in all, it was almost a 1.5 year process, a lot of time, but it's fun now that it's over.
Yeah. Well, I know for myself, at least, when anytime you sit down and have to teach or write a course, and you probably know this, having done some education, you really grab such better command of the subject material. So I'd have to feel like you almost, in a way, took yourself to the next level writing the book, right?
Yeah. I mean, I thought it would be super easy because, like I've done it a million times, but then when you, like exactly what you said, when you have to explain it to other people, you look at it from a different lens because you understand it a certain way. And that was one of the struggles I had initially with this book, is like, I wanted to dive into this and get extremely technical and go through all the lines of headers and all the different tools you can use to go through it and all the different mail platforms. And then I kind of realized, that's a game I'm never going to get caught up on, because as soon as I walk through a process with that, a new version of that mail application comes out, or a different way that they store headers, and it gets very dated. So I kind of stepped a little bit farther back and said, people ask me about phishing emails all the time. Like, I'm sure you guys working in tech, like your parents come to you and they're like, hey, I got this. Like, is this Prince from Nigeria legit?
I get
he needs help.
I get the forward with no explanation. So speaking of that, my curiosity is who's the audience? Who is this book good for? So that's what I'm keen to learn.
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's kind of where I kind of had to focus my direction on, because I didn't want to be overly technical. So my intention for the book was for entry-level analysts, end users, and network defenders.
Okay.
So I wanted you to pick up this book. If you have no technical background, you could read through it, understand the concepts, and help identify suspicious indicators for an email. But
So
I also
maybe,
wanted. Go ahead.
I'm just thinking. So maybe the tier 1 help desk at an MSP who's just starting to get more security focused would be a great book for them to buy for their team to read.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So tier 1 help desk people, maybe that IT guy, the on-site IT guy, or some of the MSP guys that are looking to pivot a little bit more into security would be an awesome audience for it. Individual users, that are just interested in cybersecurity that want to step in to the MSP space or something like that. And one of the great things that this has helped leverage me do is just the training aspect. So you can learn these concepts and then help train your end users, whether they be associates or clients, if you're an MSP, of how to do that internally. And then there's reporting that we cover in the book.
Oh, great.
There's how to handle the message, like to safely interact with it. And then that way they can package it up and help them help you.
Great.
So if you train your audience, they can be your best arm of defense instead of being a major liability. So
any I don't want to put you on the spot too much here, but you mentioned virus total. Do you cover sandboxes and kind of how to set those up? Or
absolutely. So we cover and all the tools that we cover are free open source tools. There are paid versions of a lot of them, and there are paid applications, but that kind of wasn't my intention, was to tie to a vendor or anything like that. So we have a few sandboxes that are really good, that some will let you even interact with the attachment in a safe environment. I have a few tools in here that will take screenshots of suspicious pages, so that way you can kind of view what is on the other side of this link. And again, none of these are high tech. They're just a few clicks, and you're off running, submitting files and looking at the output. And we explain a little bit about the output too, of what to look for and what should make you suspicious or not about a message.
Nick, my sandbox is my iPhone. Is that bad? It's unhackable, right?
Yeah, it's anyway.
It's a closed architecture.
I don't know if it's
that email looks sketchy. I'm gonna look at it on my iPhone.
Hey, some people, that's their logic, man. It's just the phone is harder to hack than the computer, which isn't necessarily true. But yeah, that's a way. But yes, we absolutely cover that. I cover a little bit more advanced the Pickerel process. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that. But I learned that in a SANS course and just kind of ran with it. And I'm like, man, this makes sense. It's easy to apply. I did it, in actual incidents all over the world with all kind of different organizations. And Tim, are you familiar with Pickerel at all?
No, I'd love to hear about it.
Tell us for our audience.
Yeah, so Pickerel, it's an incident response process. It stands for preparation, identification, containment, eradication, remediation, and lessons learned.
Got it.
And if you take those out, the first one of each one, the first letter of that stands for Pickerel. But it's how basically when a security incident happens at an organization, it's your process for responding to it. So in a summary, really quick, like preparation is what you're doing beforehand. It's all your security controls, like left of boom. Exactly. Yeah. Left of boom. Then you move into identification, containment are more of boom. So you're like, you see this event, you see this malware, something's going on. Containment is isolating it. So you're putting it on an island. Eradication is you're removing it from your network. Remediation is returning it back to a good known state. And then lessons learned is just like a military term, almost like an after action review. You take a look at how this went down, what controls you're missing, what didn't work. I'm sure you guys have seen that out in industry or in the MSP space, when you're going through.
Yeah, I posted about that recently. And, for MSPs, I think the lessons learned can be one of the best teaching moments for your customers is talking about how, hey, if you've been doing security right and delivering risk assessments and educating them on, hey, here's the things you need, you can tie that then in and say, hey, this incident happened. This is why we were recommending these controls, and now I think it's time to start thinking about them. So yeah, it's a great framework that should be adopted, I think. Ubiquitous.
Yeah, Jesse, and this is a term or a phrase I love to use when I do like some consulting and work with other organizations, but don't ever let a good incident go to waste.
Yeah, it's true.
You know, when you have an incident at your organization or you're helping an organization with it, you know, it's great to be in the trenches and figure it out. But when you're done, you know, the work's not over. That's when you should take a stand back and be like, what could we have done better? What could we have used? And, you know, the fire's hot. So like, that's your time to strike, you know, not when everything's cooled down and 3 weeks later when, you know, you're trying to figure out your budget for next year. It's like, hey, it's on everyone's mind. It's important. Like, let's talk about what we need and how we can improve now.
And tying that to financial numbers too. So you may come to you may say, okay, this was a 0 day. Like we heard Robert Chiaffi talk recently, Tim, right at MSP Rescue Conference about how he got popped by a 0 day Kaseya and all of his clients for ransomware, right? You look at lessons learned. Well, what could we have done to prevent that? Not much. It was a 0 day. We were actually doing all the right things. So, you know, how do we protect against that? We get better with our recovery phase and we enhance our remediation efforts, right? So it helps inform all that stuff. And my point is, it's not a predatory endeavor. It's a teaching moment and it's top of mind, right? So,
absolutely.
Talk about the escalation, right? That was the big takeaway, Nick, was just his, like, how can we practice to, like, when this happens? More so, I feel like he felt pretty strong on the left of boom stuff, but just like how could we? And you were just mentioning that before, like when the incident is hot, something bad happens. It's the same thing with like C-suite, like an enterprise. The C-suite
cyber resilience,
right? Of a small business is going to be the owner. You've got their attention. Like right now is the time to strike, as you said. Leverage it, get investment. You know, get not just dollars, but also their time, right? Like the fact that they're listening, they're willing to be educated, they're willing to be amendable to like having a conversation on how, you know, what you can deploy. So
Nick, tell us what are you doing today now that you're through this book, and what's next for you?
Yeah, so right now, you know, I had to take a breath a little bit because I finally got through all the work of this book and made it to the other side of edits and publishing and all that stuff. So I took a little bit of pause, but I'm doing a little bit of consulting right now, working a lot with MSPs actually, which is what got me tied up with most of some of you guys. I spoke at a couple events, MSP GeekCon, awesome opportunity, great group of people. But I've been doing some speaking engagements and doing some consulting, helping organizations, you know, identify phishing messages, helping them prepare with incident response plans and get ready for audits and frameworks and stuff like that. But my core stuff is with training and helping organizations mature their program. And a lot of that, honestly, is focused on phishing. It's one of the most basic attack vectors that all organizations see. Yeah. And it's not something as industry that we do great on, you know, training our people.
Nick, like if you're running an MSP, you start an MSP tomorrow, talk about 3, 4, maybe 3 things like you would do in terms of like this angle. Is it, obviously it's one of the biggest vectors.
Infection vectors. Yep.
Yeah. Right. And then also, but when I hear this all the time, everyone's like, oh, the human element's like 80%, but I'm like, of course it is. Like the human element is really 100%. Like we're somewhere along the line, somebody either wrote the code or is clicking on something. So I don't know. When I hear that, it's like, that doesn't mean you can't have controls. I think I've written posts about this, Jesse. It's like, well, just because there's a human element doesn't mean you don't turn on MFA, right? Or like things like that. So I guess, Nick, like overall, like maybe, you know, a couple things in your thoughts, like if you're starting an MSP tomorrow, like what are some of the things you use? And I don't know, is it like we allow listing and like, you know, there's all different kinds of tactics. What are some of the
Yeah.
Are you just kind of like
absolutely? Yeah. So if I was starting today,
yeah.
All right, go ahead. You good, Tim?
Yeah, I'm still twitching out here. You guys know I'm on a hotspot.
Yeah, blazing speeds there. Yeah.
The guy just showed up, by the way.
Oh, nice.
Before
Yeah.
before the show started, I got to this house up in upstate New York, and the fiber was torn out over 100 house underneath the ground into the telephone pole. I guess someone hit the telephone pole and like dragged it down the highway. So, but working all right here so far. So
yeah. So top three things to build.
I'll just go quiet. Yeah.
Yeah. Top three things to build a resilient email protection mechanism for an MSP. Go.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is communication. So, as like IT professionals, we're not the best at communicating to others, but anyone can set up this mailbox right away, and you can have users hopefully report stuff to it. But they need to, one, be educated about what's going to happen in that process, be educated about the email that you can report to them. But then two, like follow up with them. And that's what I don't see a lot of organizations do, is like you send this email and they never hear anything back unless it's bad. And that's not all the time. So communicating with them and saying, hey, I got this email. We're taking a look at it. We'll contact you if there's any further action that's needed. And then, you go about, you do your process. If you need to pull it, do whatever, you can respond immediately. But then also as things come out in the industry, so like this year, like Log4j or like Heartbleed or Move It, stuff like that, also communicating to them in the process early on, saying, hey, we know Move It is this crazy vulnerability. We're taking a look to make sure none of our systems are impacted. And what most organizations do is they don't say anything. They don't do anything. And then, you have to kind of wonder, like, as you're contracting this MSP or you're working for this IT department, like, are we concerned about that? Are we worried about it? And it takes a little bit of time. So I think the first thing I would do is communication early and often, communicate when they're reporting stuff as incidents are coming up, having a plan for communication. So like if ransomware hits your group, like, what are you going to tell your employees? What are you going to tell, the media, the customer, the lawyer, all this stuff. So it's a lot easier to do that ahead of time than on the time. So communication is my first one. Training is my next one. So I know a lot of people, they do these the phishing simulations. There's some really good tools and products out there, but almost every single one of them comes back to either a game or a video that you watch.
Yeah.
They're not always the most effective. I think they're an okay tool to keep phishing in mind. But what I think is a way better approach is to kind of take some reported phishing emails, take some stuff that's going on in the industry, and walk people through, like some of these messages. So throw it up on a screen, get in front of people and explain to them, hey, this is why this is suspicious, or this is how you should handle this and report it, and stuff like that. And then, that the users are going to trust you a little bit more. They're going to know, what you're talking about. Your analysts, and your internal team is going to be a little bit sharper too. Cause like you were saying, Jesse, like you have to teach it. So you have to demonstrate that expertise. And like that'll get you pretty far. And then the last one's technical controls. Some of the biggest ones are no cost, like EXT tagging. So are you guys familiar with that?
Yep. Tagging an email so it tells you if it came from an external source or warns you if it's a spoofed email, things like that.
Yeah, so that's one of the best, like for impersonation attempts, which are some of the most common prevalent threats. So someone works at Jesse's company and they say they're Jesse's coworker, but they're using a Gmail account. The EXT tag would flag that right away, and Jesse could tell in 3 seconds of reading the email that it didn't come from someone internal to the organization. So I think that's absolutely one of the first things that you can set up. DKIM, DMARC, those kind of SPF like rules to help validate that your email account is who it is. Having, like some of the email scanners in place, and then having, that technical process that they can forward, whether that's a button or they're trained on how to get you the emails to analyze. Would probably be my top.
So wait, you're telling me it's people, processes, and technology. I love how it always comes back to that. So I'm just nerding out over here.
Talk about the carrots and sticks, right? Like, so, I'm an employee. It's not my job. I don't care about IT. Like, I'll click on what I want to click on, right? Like how do you prevent them from doing that? How do you incent them to report?
Yeah. So
what are some of the good things you've seen out there and like good programs or like, I don't know.
Yeah, so I've seen all over the board. I've done work with some people in defense contracting that they take their email very, very serious. Like some organizations, they won't let you copy or forward a particular email. And they will do their internal testing. If you fail, they'll have you sit down with HR, they'll have you sit down with the manager, and ultimately it could lead to a termination if you don't correct that behavior. I've seen other organizations where they send out messages every single month. They never track who clicks on it. They just like get in this process and just keep doing it over and over again. But what I've seen work the best, is educating the people, building that relationship, making them kind of like coworkers or trusted advisors with you. So explaining to them why this email was phishing, using examples of people that reported emails within the company, so they know this is real. We could actually get this, and making it just like a positive environment versus putting people on blast or taking away privileges or making things harder to do their job. So it kind of starts with creating that culture with the people, training them, and then kind of like encouraging that along the way. As far as like any kind of interval, I think once a month, if you are going to do phishing simulations, is probably pretty good. If you're interested in doing it a little bit more aggressively, that's fine too. Yeah. Once a quarter, some organizations get away with it, but people get hundreds of emails a day. So
I talked to an interesting startup in training, and you got to tell me your thoughts on this, Nick. I thought it was pretty cool. They're called Shield Cyber, I think, SHYLD, a local startup here in Minneapolis. I'm from Minnesota, but I talked to one of the founders, and what they do is they actually build threat intel profiles on all the employees based on dark web feeds, have I been pwned, and all this stuff. And then they drip content based on their exposure and based on so if like a password gets uncovered, they're like, hey, you might see an email like this. So it's custom tailored threat intel.
That sounds like it's crossing some lines pretty quick.
Yeah.
ACLU,
Well, it's publicly available information, and it's just what you'd see on something, what's the big one, the big threat intel shop. I'm blanking right now. Anyways, but yeah, they're pulling threat intel feeds and actually building content for users based on that. So I thought that was a pretty interesting approach. And then to your point about communication, I love the fact that you talked about letting the users know what's going on, because having that empathy to when you communicate with a company and you open a ticket, you don't hear back for 3 days, like on your cell phone or something like that. How frustrated do you get, right?
You will not submit another ticket.
So simple things,
right? Yeah.
Simple things people can do is have, like, I know what I've done in the past is and I have templates that I use for exactly that. Hey, we've received your email. That's automatic. And then 3 different responses. It's based on, hey, this is phishing, this isn't phishing, or this is a heightened threat. It's a targeted phishing. You need to be aware of it, right? And letting them know and giving them an attaboy or an attagirl if they did it right, and if they reported it right, and helping build that teamwork and that they get a picture of what's going on. It's that organizational empathy. And then third, you talked about EXT tagging. Another thing that people can do is build a list of your VIPs, all your CISOs, all your CIOs, all your CEOs, and have that in your M365 console, so that when a spoofing attempt comes in from an email that's not an internal email with their name on it, it automatically opens a ticket for the security team and automatically flags that to the end user and to the CEO to let them know that an active attempt is going on. And that's all free with your M365 subscription. So you can do that kind of stuff today, right? So those are some really good techniques, I think, that people can take their programs to the next level with exactly what Nick is talking about.
Yeah. We got a couple comments here. I'm not familiar with SPF, DKIM, DMARC, just in terms of how it's being used. But Jesse, Nick, feel free. I don't,
Well, yes. Sender policy framework, right? You're just saying here's the email address, here's the IP or domains that are allowed to send email on behalf of me. So if somebody's spoofing your email from, a Comcast address that's got a bot on it, it's going to be denied and not be allowed through. And then DMARC and DKIM are authenticated tags as well. Yep.
Yeah. So we cover those very briefly in the book, but it's more just like at a high level because it gets a little bit more technical. But they're just verification methods to say who you are. They can be tricked too. They take a little bit more work to stand up. But you know, like a lot of times, attackers aren't going to go through that process. They're just going to register a domain and run with it.
Think about DMARC and DKIM as like HTTPS on a website, right? Like you have a public key and a private key, and so when you send emails with the private key, you're the only one that has that. So it's like when you browse to a website and you see that little green authenticated lock on it, it's the same concept for email. So that's just a high level of how it works.
So I had a comment the other day.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jesse. Oh, sorry. And I was talking about, you know, it would be amazing if everyone just used Slack or Teams, right? Because you basically have to authenticate each new user as they come into the platform. So it's a one-time, like, very high hurdle, but from then on out, like, not to mention just the workflows as opposed to emails and things like that. But it'd be amazing if email could kind of like follow that authentication kind of procedure as well.
So something I wanted to ask, and I keep getting taken off of it, Nick, what are you seeing as kind of the new, what's the new school attacks that people should be looking out for that might either be a play on old attacks or something brand new that you're seeing out there in the wild?
Yeah, so one of the most interesting ones that I've seen recently is QR code phishing. So individuals will send a phishing message with a QR code, which is, you know, a little square with a bunch of a pattern on it. Basically, when you scan it with your phone, it takes you to a web page. You know, it's got a URL. And I've seen where phishing messages, they will send that and they will say, hey, here's your Amazon gift card. To redeem it, go to or scan this QR code. You scan the QR code and it takes you to a phishing page, you know, or it asks you to log into your Amazon account, or asks you to log into your Office 365 account, or download some malicious code on your machine. And that's kind of one of the newer ones, because QR codes are fairly new. You know, you see them on billboards, on stickers all over, but they're kind of integrating those into
the phishing, Super Bowl.
Which is super old.
Remember that? The Coinbase. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's $25 of trading or something like that, whatever it was.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had this like great idea that I'm like, oh man, I'll retire and make millions. I'm like, what if I do a QR code scanner? And then you can scan that for malicious sites. And it's already been developed for like 10 years. And I was like, well, someone was way smarter earlier than
I could just drop like a phishing QR code on every table in New York that uses like Toaster, like, because no one has menus anymore. So
have you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Have you seen these? Have you seen these phishing attacks recently? I just got an email about one for a client that job related stuff where they're getting both vishing voice calls and phishing coordinated attacks to an organization trying to get into the HR department, like their applicants, or trying to send job offers to people within the organization. Have you seen this?
Yeah. I just had one actually last week where it was an impersonation attempt where the individual was contacting someone pretending to be someone else, and they had used something similar where they had set up a Google Voice number. And they had copied a signature block that looked exactly like the person they were impersonating, but they deleted the phone number out and put in the Google Voice number that they had stood up. Wow. So, and there was a reference in the email to say, hey, contact me if you have any questions. And when we were looking at this triage after the fact, we looked it up, and it was, you know, like on the other side of the country, no way the user would have stood this up. And luckily the user didn't call it, but it was kind of one of those methods where they were anticipating it. They were ready. They had the phone. I don't know if they actually tried to contact them, but I could see that kind of like multi-communication mode.
So do you think that's...
I could see that happening, Nick, like with ACH wire fraud, which is like one of the biggest insured losses, right? Like, so
hands down. Yep.
And everyone's like, oh, you should just make sure, you should call them to make sure that everything's okay. But then they're calling a number that's a Google Voice number attached to the email, and they're like, I called the number, I did everything right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I always recommend look it up somewhere outside of that email, you know, like, don't use a resource that they provided to verify them. So
would that be an instance, the one you're talking about, where they maybe had a compromised mailbox, or one of their suppliers or customers had a compromised mailbox? So they're leapfrogging, right? So again, speaks back to supply chain security, right? So maybe they are fine, but their client or a third-party supplier got popped, and they snagged the signature from that email of that mailbox they popped, and now they're trying to pop this company, right?
Yeah. And that's, I mean, I think Tim, you mentioned this, what's the biggest, most common threat or biggest impact? It's hands down business email compromise used for fraud. So they'll compromise kind of to tie both what Jesse and Tim are saying, like a vendor or someone gets popped, they get attacked, their credentials are compromised. The attacker has access to that mailbox and they impersonate to another vendor or to a supplier or a company requesting, an invoice or an ACH change or something like that. And with just a couple minutes of work, they could, get hundreds to millions of dollars transferred to the wrong account. But absolutely, yeah, that's hands down what I hear about the most, what I see the most. It has the biggest impact. And it's honestly, it's like the lowest tech. Once they get your credentials, they don't need a whole lot of advanced malware, links, attachments, anything like that. It's just content. You already trust that sender, and you've dealt with them in the past, and they do all kinds of things to make it more convincing. And that was another point that we didn't really cover too much yet, but it's just like understanding a baseline. So knowing what's normal. Like, does Jesse send me emails about mustache shampoo? Probably not, but like he could. If Tim sent me that, I'd be like, "Hey man, what gives? Like, is this a joke or whatever?" So it's just knowing like what's normal activity.
Super Mario Brothers shampoo.
Yeah, is this part of their job? Is this something I can interact with? Like, should I be? Or is it totally out of character? And that's
wow.
I mentioned that.
That's why we do units on insurance, right? It's like it's either ransomware or ACH wire fraud. ACH wire fraud, I think, is a lot more common, and it's because it's, as you said, like it's just so easy to play in the middle.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, you see that too, right? We've seen that shift back. I don't know how much you all are keeping up on kind of the statistics, but we kind of saw ransomware's back with a force now, but we kind of saw ransomware taper off as some controls got better, backups got better, and then the attackers just pivoted into business email compromise because again, they found that was the easiest way to ROI their attack scripts, right? So they moved into that, and now ransomware's back. But I think that's it's a great point. So.
Yeah, and it's going to change as as tools catch up. Yeah, and that's not uncommon. That's been going on for many years. But it works. It's low tech. It works. People fall for it, so they're going to keep doing it because they're businesses too. They have to make money.
Well, I think we're running out of time here towards the end, so I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Tim, who do we have on the show next week?
So next week, a couple colleagues from Cavello, we're going to talk data analytics, cyber analytics. Nick, we'd have you back on, but I think we've got like Hollywood squares on the screen next week, so it's going to be a little tight. But we also have a guy named Rich Connor, who was a cyber analytics wizard at one of the big banks, and he's got some experience. He's a data scientist, statistician, cyber guy, kind of. So, what are the metrics that really matter to not to MSPs, right? What are the metrics that matter to clients? And Jesse you had a post this week that really jived with exactly that, right? In terms of what's the story you can tell with numbers and metrics and data. So, we'll dive into there and we'll see where that conversation goes. But that's next week. So Hollywood Squares on data analytics and cyber analytics and telling a story that the client actually wants to engage in. So
I love that because to kind of dovetail off of this phishing conversation, right? As if you're getting targeted phishing, right? The next place you need to go is having a good threat intelligence program to understand and be able to inform your users about what's going on. So in any case, Nick, last words for us today. What should we take away if nothing else?
So spend some time training. Phishing's it's not going anywhere. We talked about all the different threats. It's been around for decades, and it's going to be around for decades more. So pick up my book, pick up other books, try and get smart on it, and kind of try and train your users. And Jesse and Tim, I really enjoyed being on the call today, chatting with you guys. It's was a good time. So absolutely interested in doing this again sometime. We could talk about something else cool or how to keep your mustache trimmed up, whatever.
VCSO services. I think we got to have a conversation about that. But
or how to get Tim a mustache.
There you go. I'm sure he can grow one.
I'm not. I said not very good. My father, his nickname was Juan Valdez. Grew up in Queens, and they called him Juan Valdez. He had this mustache since he was, I don't know, 14, out of his entire life. So, the Colombian coffee man. But
right,
anyway, guys, we are almost out of time. Yeah, go ahead, Jesse.
No, I just wanted to hear what's your takeaway from today. What should the people know?
I think I learned a lot in people, process, and technology, right? Like, how do you break this down? How do you get the end users excited about it? I think, there's some great cyber awareness training programs, which a lot of them largely talk about phishing, right? I mean, that's the biggest risk to the end user. Really excited to dig into the book. I've ordered it, but I haven't dug in yet. So I'm sure Nick has been busy mailing out books, and we'll mail a couple of books out to the people who had some comments here today as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll be looking for some addresses. Awesome. And Nick, first time I met Nick was MSP Geek, and he talked about vulnerability management. We don't have enough time to get into that today, but in the future, we'd love to dig in on was it SSVC, which is in CVSS and APSS, and talk about all the different techniques and why that's important as well. So great to have you on, Nick. And any last words, Jesse, before we close it out?
No, I think it's been great today. The takeaway is, if you want to get your techs and your MSP leveled up on security, the name of the book is How to Catch a Phish. This has been a great time chatting with Nick Ollis. I'm Jesse Miller, Power PSA Consulting, and Team Tim Live. I want to say we are so close to getting to be able to stream from Tim's Live's page. I think we're at like 145 followers or something. So if you haven't, please go over and follow the page. We just want to be able to stream it from that page and start cataloging those so people know where to go, because we're trying to give a lot of good information in these sessions. So go over, follow, like, and comment, and we will see you all next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Most of you, we've probably sent an invite, so just click OK, and we're all set, and we can broadcast this from 100% vendor neutral teamtim.live. So excited to do that. Hopefully we're there next Friday. I think we will be. But have a great weekend, guys, and we'll talk to you soon.
See you guys.